Good evening, and welcome to the January-February 2020 FAA Safety Briefing Live. I'm Paul Bradecker, and as always, I'm joined by my colleague and friend, Susan Parson, who's the editor of FAA Safety Briefing magazine. How are you tonight, Susan?
I'm good. How are you?
Well, I'm good. I know you have a bit of a cold. I appreciate you making the trip here. But you having a cold actually addresses one of the topics in the magazine, this issue about what over-the-counter medication can you take and still be legal to fly. So we'll address that later in the program.
We will get to that, but I can tell you right now, today, I probably wouldn't be flying a whole lot.
Well, it's good to know that. So we have another good issue for us this month, and as always, we're able to offer wings credit for people who are looking for wings and AMT credits. You're looking at a link that gives you direct access to the wings and AMT credit, also to podcasts, also to a print copy. And what we found quite useful is people like to link to some of the previous broadcasts. So feel free to take advantage of that. And of course, there's a test at the end.
Yes, but it's not a tough test. It's if you pay attention to the broadcast and hopefully look at the magazine, it'll be pretty easy to fill out. But this is a pretty straightforward way to get wings credit, and we hope you'll take advantage of that. Well,
let's move on. And as we often do, we just have a brief introduction about the organization and the mission of FAA Safety Briefing magazine. So, Susan.
I'll do that. You'll see that here on the slide. I did want to make the comment, though, that as you may have seen on the previous slide, your comments and questions are welcome. One of our magazine staff members, Paul Cianciolo, is standing by and keeping track of any questions that come in for us. So thank you for doing that. Our mission is to be the safety policy voice for non-commercial general aviation. And these are our goals. I'll let you read them for yourself, but one of the things that is really near and dear to my heart, and I know to yours too, is to encourage continued training. We can never learn enough.
Well, and that actually is a perfect entry into the issue this month. The issue looks a little Da Vincian, I would say.
It is.
It's called Know Your Aircraft. So what's it about?
Well, exactly what it says. And if you're wondering why we didn't introduce this issue in January, it's because my colleague here has been getting some personal experience with Know Your Aircraft. I think you spent most of January in Tucson at Flight Safety.
I did.
Learning a new airplane.
So as some of you may know, and certainly I know you do, Susan, I retired from the airlines in mid-October, and I took a couple of months off to decide what Paul version 4 would be. And I decided that I really, really enjoyed flying and I wanted to continue that as long as I can. So I joined a company that's essentially involved in medical transport or air ambulance work. And they have a fleet of Lear 35s. So I've spent, as you said, the biggest part of January in training, both ground school and simulator, learning the Lear 35. And I got to tell you, after having been in the training department for 20 years at my airline and been an examiner, being on the other side of it was an interesting experience for me. Like a lot of training programs, they're structured and they're good examples of how we should all approach learning a new aircraft, whether it's one that we rent, one that we own, one that we're thinking about flying with a friend. There really is no substitute for good training and knowing as much as you can about the airplane. My training was, I thought, quite aggressive and thorough, systems intense. But that's the purpose, because you do need to have a core knowledge of the aircraft that you're trying to master. As most structured training programs are, this one focused early on with trying to get an understanding of the aircraft limitations, and not just the limitations themselves, but why they exist and how to apply them. some more time on emergency and abnormal procedures, which of course important. Some things you have to memorize, other things you can just refer to the appropriate procedures in your checklist. We got pretty deep into systems on this aircraft, and one of the things that challenged me was I knew my previous airplane so well for the past 20 years, I had to sort of do a Control-Alt-Delete and start over. And it really gave me some empathy towards some of the students that I've worked with in the past to realize it's not an easy task to start from scratch and to learn a new airplane. And after the systems part was over, a little bit of time on procedures, but then into the simulator. And the simulator was, again, a program that was quite aggressive. We moved from a little bit of time just flying under normal situations, but then kind of one abnormal or emergency after another. But the instructor did a very good job of integrating some of the systems that we learned with putting that into the simulator so that we could see it real time. It's one thing to read about an abnormal procedure in a book, but it's another to experience it while you're actually moving at 250 knots and trying to manage everything else. So I did finish my training, and I just finished my first week of flying. I had a training captain with me this past week who actually worked at my former airline, so he and I knew one another, so that was quite nice. And Ron did such a good job of explaining things, making things very operational, cutting me some slack, I would say sometimes, because it's a completely different platform. But it really is the key to what this issue is about, the effort it takes and the importance of good instruction to know your aircraft.
Well, it's also about the importance of really knuckling down and studying. And what we wanted to do with this issue was to present some parts of the airplane and just give people a refresher and maybe some information and a perspective that's a little bit different, because you can never know enough. And I can attest to the fact that somebody spent most of his Christmas vacation studying airplane systems. But let's get into the issue.
That's great. And the first article is from the director of flight standards, Rick Domingo. There's an elephant in the room. How come?
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, well, one of the things that we wanted to talk about here is that we can talk about the individual systems, but we also have to think about how it all fits together. The story is, I'm sure most people have heard it, the story of the blind men and the elephant. Everybody was touching a different part of it and describing the animal in a completely different way. So it's about the importance of putting information together and having complete information and understanding how everything does work together. And I think that's one of the things that really comes through in the kind of training that you've been through, that you learn all the individual pieces, but then you learn about the trees and then you have to do the forest. I'm going to switch metaphors there, but I thought the elephant was kind of fun.
Well, and it also addresses the fact that you really can never know too much.
That's right.
It's we're all works in progress when it comes to studying and learning a new airplane. And I think one of the nice features of this magazine issue is that it might be new material for somebody. It might be a refresher for other people. And that's the beauty of it, is that this magazine presents things in a way that has a little bit of something for everybody. I think that when we start out learning a new airplane, of course, everything is in the book, but then there's no substitute for the operational knowledge and making that transition from coming out of class and then being able to apply it to operational. And the simulator technology is always so good that you can get a type rating in a simulator for an aircraft like this, and then the first time you're flying the airplane is the first time you're flying the airplane, and it makes it really brings everything home once you
everything together.
Yeah, it certainly does.
Although we were joking earlier, Paul and I did a presentation a while back about whose job is harder, general aviation or airline, and now that you have to do your own flight planning, I think you're actually in the hunt. I still think my job is harder, but.
Well, as I think about this past week, I think my training captain's job might have been harder just watching over me. So,
well, and that leads to leads us to talk about the first article in here, which is a topic near and dear to my heart, about avionics and automation. And I have to say, I'm always surprised every time I write about this topic. I end up hearing from a lot of people who've told me that they've printed it out and copied it to their students or made everybody in their club read it, because this is really about the importance of knowing your not just the A's that we've talked about before: attitude, altitude, and airspeed, but the other two A's are avionics and automation. And what's it doing now has become one of the memes in aviation that you have to be careful of. And I think you've had a fresh taste of that.
I have. The aircraft I'm flying now does not have quite the level of automation to what I'm used to, but it has certainly adequate automation, but it's just different. And learning to manage automation is as important as just the fundamental stick and rudder skills of flying the airplane, because it's easy to make a mistake. And unless you are devoting your full attention to what's happening, you can find yourself having to make some corrections. I know you've seen this in your instructing days, and I've certainly seen it, that there's wonderful technology available to us, and it's wonderful to be able to take part in it, to use it, to manage it, to have it reduce our workload. But being on the autopilot is not code for becoming a passenger.
That's right. Well, I use the term here, pilot in command to pilot in confusion. I've also used the term passenger in command if you just let the automation take over. But we talk about, one of the things that I talk about in here is some skills that I tried to teach with automation. First of all, automation, it does take away some tasks, but it creates an entirely new set.
Especially as the automation becomes more and more complex.
And it's all different, because if you have a 6-pack, you've flown a 6-pack, but there are different types of automation, and you got a fresh taste of that too, because this is different from what you're used to.
Absolutely. And our common friend Mike, had installed a new panel in his airplane a few years ago, and we discussed the idea that I could probably work my way through all of the menus and arrive at how to do things. But he decided, and I certainly agree with him, that going to school was the right thing to do. So we went to the manufacturer's facility and actually took a 2-day class in just learning the logic and the menu structure, because trying to manage automation as a single pilot is a lot like texting and driving.
Oh, you can't do it. No.
You just spend so much heads down time that you create some risk. So having the luxury of time to learn the automation in an environment that's not moving is a major thing to do. And I really like what was said towards the end of the article about when you engage the autopilot, you also have to leave your brain engaged.
Yes.
Because if it's something is not working correctly, you have to have immediate recognition and mitigate the risk.
So yeah, one of the things that I've always taught is using call outs, but I hope you'll read the article, because we talk about information management, automation management, and risk management as being some of the skills that you need. And one of the risk management skills, obviously there's the don't text and drive kind of thing. But there's also the fact that don't let the fact that you've got really slick looking avionics in your panel fool you into thinking that your airplane can do more than it can. It may look like a little airliner, but it still may be a Cessna. So I put a lot of heart into this article, because this is definitely a subject near and dear to my heart. And I was glad to know that it resonated with people, and I hope if you haven't read it, that it will resonate with you as well.
And time with an instructor, or time in a class, or time taking an online course in your automation will reap a lot of benefits for sure. And you make another point about if it's not doing what you want, then
turn it off.
Just you have to deal with the consequences of that. A couple of times last week when I was flying, the autopilot just kicked off. And rather than to figure out, well, why did it do that? The most important thing is get a hold of the airplane and make sure the flight path management is correct.
Should
And
they
then
pay
deal with
you
it.
more if you have to hand fly?
Oh, I hope they do. I felt like they had to, so.
Okay.
All
Well,
right.
speaking of heart, we also have an article about the beating heart of your airplane, otherwise known as the engine. And this is a little bit of a refresher about how a reciprocating engine works. You know, the basic principles. You may think you know that, and you probably do, but it's not a bad thing to review it all. But it talks about oil, fuel and oil starvation, some of the things that you can do to pre-flight. And another things that's mentioned in this article that I hope, and I think a lot of people increasingly have, is engine tracking systems. My club had the JPI, and data analysis is one of those. Early detection can lead to early solving problems, and it can keep it from becoming a noisy and expensive problem.
And as James Williams points out, you can't overstate the importance of a pre-flight.
Absolutely.
And even if you're the owner operator and you think you know everything about your airplane, you still need to go through the methodical steps, especially with the basics. I mean, he talks about oil as the lifeblood of the engine for lubrication and cooling, of course, but other things about attach points, the exhaust system, how the engine is cooled, and even though this article addresses reciprocating engines, the four-stroke principle has often been referred to as suck, squeeze, bang, and blow. A turbine engine is just the same. It just does it all at the same time.
Does it at the same time.
So,
by the way, one of the things that you need to learn about your new engines is where they are, so you don't walk into them.
I know. I dented my head a few days ago, and Susan said, "What happened?" I said, "I walked into the airplane." So
you just need to learn where the pieces are, so you don't smack into them.
That's right.
So moving on, we have another article. I have to say, I learned a lot from the work that the staff did on this issue, because there were a lot of things both as a longtime pilot and as an instructor that I kind of figured, oh yeah, I know about that. But we got into some depth in these articles that I hadn't anticipated. And this one, I love the way, well, the title's fun, but I love the way it started out with saying that, we tend to equate airplanes with birds, but a bug is actually a better analogy. And if you're curious about that, please do take a look at this article, because it's very entertaining, but as well as accurate.
Well, one of the really outstanding examples that I never really stopped to think about, but again, the author did such a nice job of paralleling it to airplanes, is if you take an aluminum can that is pristine without any deformation in it and try to push down on it, you're just going to get resistance. But if you put a dent and push, you're going to collapse the can a little bit. And that's the same issue with the metal airplanes that we typically fly, is they're structurally sound, but
if they're damaged,
it should be noticeable, of course. And when you're doing your pre-flight, it's nothing to ignore. You might think just something, a little bit of a wrinkled skin is, oh, that's not a big deal. But it could be a big deal. It could be the symptom of something that's underlying in the structure that might cause a problem.
Well, this article talks about metal construction. I remember when we were planning this issue, we did talk about the fact that we wanted to, there's still a lot of metal airplanes out there. My clubs is one of them. But they're increasingly composite and carbon fiber airplanes. And this article explains some of the basic principles of construction of composites, but this is really important. Here are some things to look for and things to be aware of that can harm an airplane with a composite fuselage.
Well,
some of the things that you need to be aware of.
Heat is certainly one of them, and plus contact damage may not be immediately noticeable, but it was really well done. I like the analogy of the can. It would help me explain what semi-monocoque structure means.
Yeah, because it's otherwise it seems like an abstract term. I'll also point out that this article, it's not shown on this particular slide, but one of the illustrations for this piece of the magazine was my club's airplane when it was, we had some damage to ribs and stringers and structure from deer.
Was that the deer?
Oh, yes. So that picture was taken when the poor little airplane was being rebuilt, and I think we've ended up using that picture quite a bit, but I just, that's a look at my airplane back in 2006. So
oh, wow.
it was a long time ago, but it doesn't feel like it was so long ago, obviously.
Yeah. The next one's fun.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's got a little French.
The yes. French, yes, of course. And there's the little arrow there. This was, we talked about tail structure, the fixed and movable surfaces, and there's some review of the basic terminology and so on. But the feather was fun, and I think you used to play.
Well, I'd like to visit with Tom Hoffman a little bit, because I have a dartboard down in the basement, and I used to very, very carefully pick out just the right darts in terms of weight and feathers and everything.
Did you put faces on it?
I did not. No, I did not. But he mentioned that he was in London
right.
playing darts. I had my time with a few times in France, and then sometimes down in the basement. But it's such a key structure, and they don't always have to be the same. I like his review of V-tails, the straight tail, the T-tail. Of course, T-tail airplanes have their own characteristics in terms of handling. The twin tail, of course, and let's not forget the classic Constellation, which is
I love the
three-tail. But all of this is about knowing, just saying, well, I have a certain type of empennage and a certain type of tail. That should be means for a lesson in learning about the handling characteristics of a particular airplane. How does one handle more than the other? And it's another stepping stone to learn a little bit more about your airplane. But Tom goes on to talk also about the trim systems, and that can't be overlooked in terms of pre-flight for sure. We were all taught, I'm sure in our private pilot days, that when we're looking at flight control surfaces, make sure that we see the appropriate attachments, that the safety pins are correct.
Safety wiring is in place.
Exactly. Yep. And just make sure that everything is as it should be. And it's one of those things that is easy to overlook, because, well, I just flew it yesterday, what could possibly be wrong? But in fact, something could be wrong, right? So I really like Tom's treatment of the various configurations of the empennage and the tail. Discussions of trim systems, of course, is really important. It made reference to the stabilator. I've flown a couple of airplanes with a stabilator. And yes, you have more result for less input, but then if you have too much input, you can get not the result you want. And it's all about learning and knowing what to expect.
Well, and knowing that with each and every airplane, you've got to treat it according to the way that it's intended to be treated. One of the things that I think you'll notice in each one of these articles is that we also talk about specific areas for pre-flight. I've just mentioned a few of them here on the slide, but condition of antenna lights, doors, ELT, loose or missing rivets, and again, wrinkled or damaged skin, hanger rash, that goes for the tail as well as the rest of the skin and the fuselage. So these are, every part of the airplane is important. And one of I just think that this issue, when you start looking at all of the individual parts and how they fit together, it goes through the whole theme. It all has to work together, and one part being weak will weaken the entire structure and the overall airplane.
On the next topic,
the wing.
We'll have to wing it through this one.
Yeah. No. The wing's the thing.
And I really enjoyed this one because it was a review. If you get into the magazine and have a look at what Jennifer did in terms of the various wing platforms, it's an introduction to something else that we don't always think about, and that is, how will this airplane or this wing stall? Because they're not all created equal. Some, of course, are going to stall from the wing root out, but then there are some wing platforms where they're going to stall from the wing tips in, and of course that has complications in terms of aileron control and things like that. So the other part of this, she does a great job of doing she has different
There are
wing
charts.
placement,
Yeah, right.
and it has pros and cons.
Mhm.
So we go through low wing, a high aspect, high wing, and talks about the pros and cons. But what she's really talking about is risk management.
Yep.
Because if you look at some of the disadvantages, that should be a tip to think about the risk involved if things are not,
As
if
they
it's not
should
flown the
Right.
way it should be. So even something as simple as a wing design can be critical in terms of risk management.
In terms of risk management for all kinds of safety. One of the things I think is mentioned here, but this is more about structure, but of course, people, high wings and low wings have different risk management characteristics as well for seeing and avoiding.
Sure.
And different characteristics for how fast they fly, like your new ride.
Mm-hmm.
Wing design. Another thing, with each of the articles here, we talk about some of the pre and post flight things that you should be looking for. And here's something that I really wanted to point out, and I made sure that I put it on the slide. Inspection of the wings, and we talked about you were talking about the safety wiring and all the
Mm-hmm.
attach points. But another thing is the balance weights. I can't tell you how many times I've been with pilots, and if I taught somebody, they learned right away what the balance weights were. But if I were just doing a checkout, I'd follow people around while they're doing their pre-flight, and I would always point to the balance weights and say, okay, what about that? And a lot of times they'd sort of look at me like, huh, what?
Mm-hmm.
What is that? So we would talk about what the balance weights are and how important they are to avoiding flutter, which is
Not a good thing.
Not a good thing, because it can cause your airplane to come apart at a time when you really don't want it to. Actually, you don't ever want your airplane to come apart.
No.
But this is the charts in here are really good, and I know I will tell you, I know Jennifer spent a lot of time working on this, so to make sure that it all.
It's a great article, and the one sidebar about pre and post flight, and just to amplify on that a little bit, it was a requirement in my previous airline. It's also a requirement in my 135 operation that we don't just do pre-flight, but we do post flights.
Oh yeah.
I used to teach all the time in single engine aircraft to do a mag check on the way in,
Mm-hmm.
not just on the way out, but on the way in, because I'd rather deal with it
at the end.
End. But it's the same for post flight. I mean, a lot can happen. Simple things like bird strikes, or
Mm-hmm.
you pick up a piece of gravel on your prop or something, and all of this can be part of a post flight inspection as well as a pre flight. And in some manuals I've seen, they refer to it as walk around. But I actually like pre and post flight inspection.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy to walk around and just have a cursory look, but to spend the same amount of time on a post flight as you do on a pre flight might save you some time, or certainly save a safety issue.
Well, and it could also be a safety issue for the next pilot, because if you catch something on an airplane that you've rented, or an
Mm-hmm.
airplane like in my club other pilots fly, and you point it out, what if the next pilot isn't quite as careful or just didn't spot it? So we all work together. We're all aviators.
And the other thing too that we could take us another topic for maybe another article is all of the things that could be attached to a wing. For example, vortex generators,
Mm-hmm.
Stall strips, the way the wing is shaped, in terms of not having a symmetrical chord line to help prevent stall and spin issues. There's so many subtleties about a wing that are important to look at and to know why they're there. And if you have an airplane with, for example, vortex generators, those are there for a specific reason, and it's something else to understand the effect of.
Well, and if some of them are missing, does that matter?
That's right.
I know there are issues with that. So yeah, the wing's the thing, and I think
it's a great article
through that one.
Yeah, a great article. And we're getting to the underside of the airplane now with the article about Give Me a Break, and maybe
a tire and a strut
too.
Yeah, all right.
It's a good review of fundamental hydraulics for aircraft brakes, but
ways to steer. Haven't you had to relearn that?
I have had to relearn it. I'm pretty sure that steering this new aircraft has been one of my bigger challenges, because there's no tiller. The steering is very sensitive. There's limitations on when you can engage the steering and when you cannot. The steering mechanism is actually quite complicated in terms of its It's got AC electrical and DC electrical components to it. It's got mechanical components, of course. And for the first couple of nights in the sim, I was just happy to stay on the taxiway. It was something different for me. So, but again,
you ran off a time.
I did. Sure, I did.
Right.
But it's another example of you have to have a systems knowledge of what you're getting ready to do so that your operational knowledge and ability will follow suit. This article, again, by Tom Hoffman, talks quite a bit about the different types of braking systems, tail wheel versus nose wheel, the advantages.
Castering. The first time I ever flew one of those, I thought I was, well, let's just say I had to get used to that. So, and then flying a tail wheel when I got my tail wheel endorsement. Tiller is not terribly common in the airplanes that we fly, but there are airplanes that have those. Knowing the static load extension. So, we go around and we do it should be about this thickness. You really need to pay attention to what the strut extension should be. Especially
on a retractable airplane, because that could have an effect with the ability for it to retract and then ultimately come down again.
And then brakes during pre-flight. One of the things that I was always very careful to teach is, well, first of all, if you see fluid coming out of the airplane anyplace, it's basically the airplane is bleeding, and you need to understand what's bleeding and why, and just not say, well, it just does that. At hydraulic fluid leaks, that can be an issue, and brake pad thickness.
Pad thickness, absolutely.
I believe this also talks about what we do, what I hope you do when you start taxiing, is check the brakes, and if there are brakes on the passenger side and there's another pilot aboard, have that person check brakes as well, because the time to know if you have an issue and you can't stop is right at the beginning, not when it's too late.
And there's a kinetic energy equation that I probably knew at one time about when a brake's more effective versus they're not as effective. And of course, if you just touch down and immediately start pressing on the brakes, you're going to dissipate a lot of energy and create a lot of heat. So if runway is not a factor, sometimes it's just perfectly fine to roll and then apply the brakes as you get a little bit slower.
How are the brakes on your new ride?
They work seemingly well. There's also a thrust reversers, which also help. So
that's good.
Yeah, it's been fun. It's just that whole steering thing that was a little bit hard for me to get used to.
Well, this is a little rocket ship. I've been teasing Paul all week, saying that he went from basically flying the family sedan to you're flying a Maserati now.
I was just the acceleration and the climb rates are something that are different. And of course, it's one of those things that I knew it would do it from a technical standpoint, but experience in it is another thing. But that's the joy of flying, right? Is to gain some experience and have fun learning a new airplane.
Well, I hope you'll not be too spoiled to get back into the Bonanza.
I won't be.
Okay. Good.
No, that'll be fine.
Okay. All right. Now we're gonna we also talk about drones and knowing your drones, so we can. We have a really fun checklist on here, and although it's presented in the context of drones or unmanned aircraft systems, this is a little checklist, if you remember it, that can help you with anything you're flying.
Well, it does focus on drones to start with.
Yeah.
And again, the emphasis and the message in this article is you need to know your drone. You need to read the manuals. You need to know its capabilities. And even though it says easy to fly, does not necessarily mean it's going to be easy to fly. That's more marketing, I would say, than reality in some cases. I've only had very slight experience flying a drone type device.
That would be your Star Trek.
My Star Trek drone. Yeah, it's not that easy.
I know.
No, it's not that easy. So the principle here is to understand the gear that you have. Again, know what you have. And before you launch off, and we do this in an aircraft all the time, we just don't launch off without an idea about altitude and heading and where we're going. But you need to have a plan, especially when you're flying a drone, because there are other variables that you're not in control of in terms of other things that may be around you. You need to pay attention to altitude. So it's important to have a good plan. And then the other part is just simply don't believe that it's easy to fly. You need to take some time to learn it and practice.
Yeah, there's one of my colleagues has a small drone in his office, and it was always fun to watch people come in on breaks trying to figure out how to fly it, and they'd crash it all over the office, sort of like you were crashing your Star Trek drone. But he slowed that down a little bit. He put a logbook in there and made anybody who wanted to fly the drone sign the logbook so they could prove what they had done. But yeah, gear plan and skills. I put this. I kind of made a mental note of this one is no matter what I'm flying, this is a really great checklist to use.
And it's simple and it's to the point.
And check 3 GPS. It's also very it's very apropos in all kinds of ways.
Absolutely.
So regardless of what you're flying, this works for you. And there's a little logo there that somebody's come up with. So maybe pin that to your panel just to remind you.
Well, and it's so easy to be complacent about things. Well, we're just going to go on a short 20-mile flight. What could possibly happen? And of course, a lot can happen in 20 miles.
Right.
So just to have something as a quick memory aid about the way to prepare and understand what the mission can save you. Sure. On the maintenance side of things, Susan, it's talking about reducing maintenance-related engine failures. And one of the
wait a minute, we got ahead here.
Oh, did we?
Yeah, we did. Keep going.
Yeah,
the next one is about vertically speaking. I think you
I did get ahead. Sorry. All right. So we're back to helicopter and vertically speaking. And this is all about the importance of exceptionally thorough pre-flights. And a group of us were talking just a few days ago about the intricacy of helicopters and that there are so many moving parts that the pre-flight and attention to detail is exceptionally important.
It really is. Well, this checklist and some of the things that were developed by the helicopter safety team about pre-flying in helicopters, they actually apply to any airplane that you're flying. Use a suggested outline. I really thought this next part was important. A no phone policy during pre-flight inspection. Put the phone away. Don't text. Don't phone. Don't talk to anybody. Don't rush anything. And this is something that is hugely important too. If you look at that next to the last bullet, in post-maintenance, open everything. See it, touch it, speak it. I've seen this to perform a maintenance pre-flight, or actually any pre-flight periodically, just do it in the reverse direction. And another thing that Paul and I were talking about before the broadcast, I was taught a long time ago, if you are the person bringing an airplane or an aircraft of whatever sort out of maintenance, it's a really good idea to take off and stay in the pattern within landing distance first, and make sure that everything is going to check out before you start to fly way too far from a good landing spot. So this piece is aimed at helicopters and knowing the helicopter and knowing how to pre-flight it properly. But some of the techniques in here are applicable to anything. And
there's a couple of phrases in your bullet points here about don't rush anything and try to eliminate distractions, of course. In my previous airline, we had a program, of course, it was a voluntary safety program called ASAP, Aviation Safety Action Program, where crews would voluntarily report.
It's the airline form of NASA.
It is. It's the airline form of a NASA report, and it's either to report a safety problem or to voluntarily disclose something that a crew did that where they made a mistake. And the intent of it is to learn, is to learn from the mistakes and put them into a database so that other people can benefit. We did a survey of a year's worth of reports, and we found that about 78% of the reports contained the words rushed or distracted. So if you just think about that for a minute, that means that a lot of this is preventable.
Absolutely.
If you just have the discipline to do it, and certainly the same with pre-flights and post-flights.
Yeah, I try to do pre-flights, especially if I'm going to be bringing passengers who are not familiar with the airplane. Obviously, you want to try to bring people into aviation, but if your passengers are going to be a distraction in any way, go do the pre-flight, take care of that before you bring them to the airport, and then you can tell them that you've already done it so that they know. But that way, you have made sure that you don't have any distractions.
That's right.
So it's all about paying attention to what you're doing, and again, back to the theme: know your airplane, know your aircraft.
Now I think we're on to the maintenance side. The maintenance side of things, reducing maintenance-related engine failures, and there's
engine failures in the sim.
Always, yeah, it's a great plane on one engine.
Yeah, so, right.
This one of the key pieces of data here was the very first one. About 7% of fatal accidents were somehow attributed to engine maintenance-related issues. So there's some steps that we can take both as maintenance providers as well as the receivers of the maintenance.
The receivers of the maintenance, absolutely. Because remember, no matter who signs off on the maintenance, the person who's flying the airplane is always the one who is going to live with most of the consequences. So this talks about some of the things, the ways to make sure that all of the proper procedures have been performed. Research, plan, conform, perform the inspection, return to service, document everything, performance runs, all sorts of things like that. So, one of the things I always learned from this column about some of the maintenance practices, not having been part of that world, there's an awful lot of detail involved in it that I greatly appreciate as somebody who flies the airplane.
Well, all it takes is to get a maintenance log of an aircraft and start working through it, and you see the exceptional detail that needs to be documented, so that the owner or the operator has a good reference.
Absolutely.
The next topic kind of leads into this, and that is, as an owner, what can you do? And there's owner perform preventative maintenance, which again, this is a very good summary of what an owner operator can do as a preventive maintenance standpoint. And there's 3 bullet points here: removal, install, repair of landing gear tires, cleaning spark plugs, setting in the gap, adjustments of non-structural fasteners incidental to operations. But it goes on to say that you have to use some common sense.
Yeah.
If the operation is complex, then maybe it's time to have a qualified mechanic.
Well, the fact that you're allowed to do it doesn't mean that you are actually qualified to do it.
Sure.
That certainly would go for me, because I don't know anything about it. I would never try to do any of these things without having somebody who knew what they were doing, teaching me and showing me. But I think it ends with know your responsibilities. And if you go up to that bullet before the last one, pilots who do preventive maintenance are bound by the same regulations as any certificated maintenance technician.
That's an important point.
That is a very important point. And again, if it's your airplane and you're performing preventive maintenance or whatever you're doing to your airplane, you're also going to have to live with those consequences. So, and fly with the consequences. So be humble. And this, but we put this piece in partly to remind people of their responsibilities in doing preventive maintenance if they choose to do so. But I've heard over and over again that if you really, really, really want to know your airplane, getting involved in some of the maintenance that you're allowed to do would be a great way to do it, I'm sure.
And of course, the owners of experimental aircraft, they have the ability, because they built the airplane, therefore they can work on it, but they also have to understand the limits of their responsibilities as well. Yes. It doesn't mean, well, because I can, I'm thoroughly familiar with an RV7, doesn't give you the license to go out and take a Piper Lance apart. So it's the same thing about making sure you understand your responsibilities. But have a look at the link that's provided in the page. 31 items a pilot can perform without supervision. So that will help give you an idea about what you can and cannot do. Then you have to evaluate whether you should and should not do it.
That's a good way to put it.
That's right. Okay. All right. This next article is about the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, and I know you're quite familiar with the H publications.
I am. Hand me the book. I decided I was playing with words. That's what I do. What we tried to do with this piece was to point to, as this column intends to do, to help point you to FAA resources free that can help you learn more. And the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge has a great deal of information, far more than we are able to do in just this magazine article. But what we've done is provided what I call VFR direct links to some of the chapters that line up with the topics that we've addressed in the magazine. So if you're sitting around in the winter and you can't go out and fly, this is a great time to dive back into the books. Ideally, your pilot's operating handbook for your specific airplane, but learn some general things as well. And the PHAC, as we all colloquially call it, the PHAC has a lot of great information in it, so take advantage of it.
It's downloadable.
Absolutely.
It's downloadable. It's in hard copy from various aviation suppliers. Yep. It's sort of like the ultimate reference to all things.
Sure.
All
and
things
if you want to just download a specific chapter, that's what we've tried to help guide people to as well. So there we go.
That's great. The next article is kind of fun. It's
called, a lot of fun. Yeah.
It's on the money, but it's all about energy management.
Absolutely. So both in the air carrier world and in general aviation, the term energy management has started to be used quite a bit in connection with maintaining airplane control. And we've got it incorporated now into airman certification standards. You're going to see a lot more of it. But one of the things where we thought we had more of a gap was in guidance material about energy management. So there's a professor at Embry-Riddle who has come up with this wonderful analogy. And oh my goodness, it's appropriate in so many ways because money and airplanes kind of
go together.
Yeah, or not. One bleeds the other. But what he did is he came up with a really fun analogy here that I think makes it easy to think of energy management in the same way that you think of money management. He's saving, store energy. You earn energy in certain ways. You spend it in certain ways. You can transfer it. You can. But he makes the point, and I think this is absolutely true. One of the things you do not want to do is go bankrupt either financially or in terms of airspeed or altitude. So one of the things that we're looking to do is incorporate more material like this into the next version of the Airplane Flying Handbook. So this is just a little bit of a taste. And if you've been wondering, seeing the term energy management and wondering what that might be, this is a great way to get started with learning a concept.
And of course, many of us have had the pleasure of seeing Bob Hoover's routines at the FAA conventions in Oshkosh, which is the ultimate in energy management.
Yeah.
And I think, my late uncle, who was a British gentleman, was also a pilot. He learned to fly in Tiger Moths, but his real passion was gliders. And he spent quite a bit of time flying gliders in England. And whenever I would go visit with him, of course, we would talk about flying. Yeah. And where was I flying and what was my airplane like and what's it like to fly a jet and this and that. So we used to have some fun conversations about our flying interest. But one day he announced to me very clearly, he said, well, Paul, he said, you will never be a proper pilot.
A proper pilot
until you learn to fly gliders, because it's all about energy management. So
well, that's still on the list.
It's still on the list to try to sort that out. So
on the money is right on the money in terms of this topic. So please take a look at that and stay tuned for more.
Let's have a look at your post-flight article.
Yeah, post-flight is a little bit of a slightly different take, well, certainly on wrapping up the issue, but it's a little bit of it's another perspective on the avionics and automation that I talked about in the No Surprises article. I started with a quote here about accepting reality, that if you don't deal with reality, reality will deal with you. And I started this piece with a story about somebody who hired me to fly to see why it was that his airplane he had brand new equipment in an older airplane and why it wasn't doing what it was supposed to do. And it really bugged him that it wasn't doing what it was supposed to do. And finally, after watching what it consistently did do, I just said, hey, okay, look, forget what it's supposed to do. Here's what it does. Now adjust your expectations according to what is the reality here, and then we'll go. We also talk about how reality is important in terms of knowing what normal indications are and paying attention, so that if you see something that's not right, don't just accept it. And I always end up putting reading in here. I love Malcolm Gladwell. I've read pretty much everything that he's written. And talking to strangers, he talks about how humans have this ability to, as you see on the slide, rationalize inconvenient facts to accept something we want to believe is true. Well, that's bad business anywhere in life, but especially in aviation. So it's a habit that we need to break. We need to be able to accept reality and deal with it. Part of knowing your airplane and knowing yourself.
Indeed. The next two are from our medical group.
Yep.
Dr. Berry has written a nice article and has discussed the idea that there now is a list of acceptable medications that was a challenge to put together. And if you read his article, you get the idea about the serious challenge it was, because everybody responds differently to drugs. There's certain side effects that might be in antagonism with other drugs. But there is a list that is accessible. There is a link in the article that will help us understand, which is why I mentioned the part about over-the-counter medication. We think that, just because it's over-the-counter, it's okay, but it's not always okay. And Dr. Berry goes to some discussions about what's appropriate and what's not, measuring everything from will this create sudden incapacitation to subtle incapacitation, and then everything in between.
Yep.
And then the next part of the medical review is ADHD.
Condition inspection.
Inspection. And the good news is, if you have this condition or situation and you might be taking medication for it, you need to work with your AME and sort this out.
That's always the rule. Work with your AME.
Work with the AME, because there's certainly some cases where you can get a medical and carry on, and it just has to be managed.
So there's quite a bit of detail in here about that particular issue. And then leading to the next one, the subject of FAA faces this issue is the new Deputy Federal Air Surgeon. I had the pleasure of meeting him a couple months or a month or so ago. He's had a very, very interesting background, always interested in flying, but had an experience that led him into being a physician, and this is a way that he can combine the both. And he spent some time in the military, and seems to be very excited to be at the FAA and in this new role. So glad to have him.
I'm sure you are. The next one, as we kind of wrap up, is just some of the kind of the news that's in the magazine. There's a couple of them that are of note to me. One is the cold temperature restricted airports.
Kind of important to you now, right?
Well, and it's important to everybody, especially if you're instrument rating flying into airports that are classified under the cold temperature restricted airports. The bottom line on this is, if the temperatures are below a certain value at certain airports, you have to make some altitude adjustments over certain fixes. And this goes into some detail about updating those airports and also about just the information itself. And then 51,000 people since November, or as of November, have signed up for Basic Med.
Yep. So there's a little bit of a review of the basic facts there. There's a piece about the ADS-B deviation authorization pre-flight tool, ADAPT. It's an option, but not for habitual use. You can read about that. And then the radio frequency reduction update, redundant RCOs are starting to go away. So lots of changes there, and we just summarized some of them in ATIS, as we usually do.
And feedback.
Feedback, yeah, lots of ways to get to us. Safety briefing at FAA.gov. We've had quite a few letters about this issue already. You can reach us on Twitter. You can follow us on Twitter. Lots of, and that kind of leads to the next slide, which is how do you find us?
Well, your colleague, Paul Cianciolo,
yes, indeed,
who is working behind the scenes, does such a good job with your social presence.
Social media, and he's the one who not only makes all the electronic formats available, but in addition to that, he is the one who turns them into individual articles that come to some of the people who subscribe via email. And I know that a lot of people have been reading the magazine that way. So what we're trying to do is leading edge of some of the social media and the way that people actually read content now. And it's a great team we have to pull it all together that way.
And coming up?
Yes, next issue.
Yes.
We're just wrapping that up now. It's already with the designer. Weather technology in the cockpit. It sounds a little bit like some of the it's the automation and avionics, but the capabilities that we have to get weather. And we also talk in that issue. We're going to be talking about some of the perils. Everything has a leading edge, has a bleeding edge. We've got to be careful. There are things that you have to be careful about, and we'll talk about what some of those things are.
Well, since we've passed the ADS-B requirements, many people now have ADS-B in their aircraft with the ability to get weather in if they have ADS-B in, and it's such an amazing tool to be able to see almost real time what's around you and in front of you. But as one of your colleagues discussed the last time we had this, you have to make sure you know what you're looking at and to interpret the information. So just because we have access to all of this doesn't mean we can blindly go forth. We still have to understand what it's doing and to know the technology, just like we were talking about knowing your aircraft.
Well, actually, I'll give you a little bit of a sneak preview. Sabrina has an article in the next issue called Mind the Gap, which is about latency issues. But another thing that I think is really important for people to understand, and this was something that I remember several years ago took me by surprise. Just as a six-pack is a six-pack is a six-pack, but different manufacturers have different ways of doing the buttons and the organization of their avionics systems. The same thing right now is true with weather. You have different symbology used by different manufacturers, and there's some research going on as to what is the most effective, how do you really get pilots' attention, and how do you standardize but without stifling creativity? It's a little bit of a challenge and a balancing act, but it all comes down to, I'm going to keep saying it, know your airplane. Don't assume that what you're flying now and what you're working with now is the same everywhere.
That's right.
So we'll be back with that issue.
Yeah, and once again, just the slide that shows how you can get Wings credit for this. Wings and AMT. Podcasts are available. You'll need the print copy to get through the Wings test. And then all of this is archived, so you can link to previous broadcasts.
Yep, and the quiz, again, it's fairly straightforward. The point is to hope that you go through the articles and take a good look at everything. So hope everybody will enjoy this issue. It is, our cover was a fun piece of art, the Vitruvian airplane, kind of like Leonardo da Vinci. Yeah. So,
well, your authors and designers do such a great job. So
we have a great team. And I'd like to also thank John Typin, who's the master behind the camera here. So John does great work for us too. So we appreciate that.
So until the next time, Susan, I don't know where we'll be, but we'll do it again.
And maybe you'll have learned you will know your airplane better.
I will know my airplane more.
You will not bump into it quite as much as you did this time.
That's correct.
So we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us.
Take care.